Awesome. Welcome back to the second session of the Oregon Citizen Assembly pilot on COVID recovery. So nice to see everybody's faces here. As Wendy just said, it was really nice to see everyone last time, and thank you for joining us again on a Thursday, beautiful sunny Thursday evening, at least here in Western Oregon. A few little housekeeping things, and then we'll get rolling real fast. So we mailed you a couple of documents this week, and just a quick show of hands, if you want to raise your hand using the raise hand feature. Did anybody not receive a letter from us yesterday or today? There may be a few folks. I just want to get a sense of how many folks there might be. All right. There's a few, maybe about 8 people or so. Okay, that's pretty good. That's not too bad. Thanks. So that's one of the things that we, in response to your feedback and feedback from moderators last time, we got some feedback via the researchers, and there are a few things, ways we've responded. So one of the things we've done is to try to mail you a few documents to read, so you don't have to stare at the screen the whole time. We're also increasing the amount of individual work time this time, so you have a little bit of time to sort of think about what you're looking at before we launch straight into discussion about it. And then another thing is that we heard from a couple of the moderators, at least, that they really wanted to get to know their kitchen table a little bit more. And we realized, oh yeah, you only had a few minutes at the end of last session, and it was even a little bit shorter than it was meant to be. So this whole session today, you're going to be with your kitchen table group. And then on in the future, you'll be mixed up again, kind of like the first session would, and come back to that kitchen table at the end of each session. But for today, all day, you'll get to know that group a little bit. Let's see. Right, I'm going to share my screen now. That's what's next on the agenda. Okay, so welcome back. A little bit about what's happened, where we've been, where we're going. In session 1, you did 3 main things. Well, you did sort of introductory stuff, and then got into 3 main things. First of all, reviewed the questions from the state legislators. You reviewed some testimony that legislators had received back in March from various members of the public around Oregon. And you did a first very quick kind of brainstorm of some potential principles that might underlie future decisions. By the way, you actually did a lot of that. There are 50 principles that you'll see a little bit later on that you created. And they're exactly as you left them. We haven't done any editing or anything. There's typos in them, just exactly as the moderators took notes. But you'll have an opportunity to sort of add to that list, to look back at what past panelists, or what your fellow panelists have written down as well. And that brings me into session 2 here. Actually, that's the first thing that you'll be doing today, is looking back at that list of core principles right where you left off last time, and adding to it, endorsing any that you feel like are particularly strong as principles. You'll also be going back to the legislators' questions, but this time, and to the testimony as well, but this time you will be making some decisions on what the question is that you'll be focusing on the rest of these sessions, decisions on which among those kind of categories of testimony, using those categories as kind of a guide for what the different kind of subject matter here might be, to pick a couple of focus areas. Within that, whatever question you select, you'll have a couple of we're going to focus on these 2 things. And then using that information, you'll decide on some witnesses to call. These are folks, academics or people from government, or people from civil society or business leaders. Given there's sort of a menu of options, a whole bunch of folks that the National Policy Consensus Center, our partners at PSU, have put together that you will be able to pick from as a panel. And the folks you pick will appear before you next week and the following week. So just a reminder of sort of where the broad scope here. We're still in the section where we're dealing with principles, and you'll continue to deal with that next week. Next week, you'll sort of decide, make some decisions about principles. Today, it's still just about brainstorming, sort of identifying which ones might be better than others as sort of overarching principles. You'll also be dealing with its information piece. That's all this sort of making decisions about the content, the agenda of the rest of this assembly, and about what witnesses you're going to call. Just a reminder to be open to new ideas, listen with care, and remember that we're trying to not sit on opposite sides of the issue, but sit on the same side. We may not have the same opinions, but we're looking at the same issue and trying to find solutions. And a reminder that you can contact me if you have any comments or questions. I know 1 or 2 people reached out to me last week, and I appreciate it. All right, now I'm going to stop my sharing on my screen and share a different screen. This one right here. So all right, the first group we're going to go into, as we mentioned, is this first group to talk about core principles. And just a reminder about what these things are sort of meant to be. They're meant to be aids to you in your future decisions as a panel, but they're also going to form part of the final report that you produce that'll be sent to legislators. So there'll be guides to legislators as well. Right now, you've just listed a whole bunch of potential ideas, and as I said today, and then next week, you'll sort of be winnowing these down a little bit. These are general principles that you feel should back up any decisions related to the pandemic. This is sort of your checklist of priorities, that any potential policies, no matter what the policies might be, should be checked against. So here's an example, sort of ridiculous. I gave you an example last time, but it wasn't a great example. This is an example from my personal life, and I hope you'll find it entertaining. So I bought a car about 3 years ago, and here were my sort of core principles in figuring out what car to buy. It had to be dirt cheap. I work for a little nonprofit, as you know. It had to be reliable. It had to be comfy for me to sleep in overnight, because I kind of like going to the mountains and not having to pitch a tent. I thought it should have cruise control, because I kind of like driving long distances, and I want it to look like not awful. But of course, like all these things can't necessarily be satisfied. So sort of, and we all do this, I think, just sort of naturally in our head when we're trying to make a decision. I sort of prioritize them. Dirt cheap was definitely number one. That was a requirement, no question there. This being able to sleep in it turned out to move right up the list. I really wanted something that I could make into a little camper van. But other things like cruise control ended up moving down the list, and the car I ended up buying, which is a 97 VW Golf, works as a little camper van, believe it or not. Was dirt cheap, but does not have cruise control. Definitely not. Doesn't even have it has manual windows. So it's not that these principles will necessarily be all things that any policy can satisfy, but at least they're kind of check boxes. And the more check boxes a particular recommendation might satisfy, the more you may think it's a good recommendation. So this is sort of setting up those big principles. This wasn't like me deciding what make and model of car. That's the sort of the policy solution. We're one step before that, which is just here's some stuff. Here's the kind of big picture, like kind of values that we need to hold no matter what we decide on this issue. So with that, let's move into the first small group session, and we'll see you on the other side of it.